Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you.
Now, next week, of course, brings us the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and with it the annual Jewish pilgrimage to the gravesite of Rabbi Nachman in the town of Uman in Ukraine. Last year's event during the height of the pandemic was unfortunately marred by what I guess best could be called the lack of coordination, worse, what some might describe as the reckless behavior of some of the participants. What are the arrangements being made for this year's pilgrimage in Uman to avoid repeating those kind of scenes?
First of all, I have to say that last year it was no pilgrimage because of the pandemics. It was quite a bit of the infringements of the legislation because of that, because of some of the believers was trying to pass the Ukrainian border illegally, and unfortunately they got permissions not to get to Ukraine for 3, 5, 10 years, depends on what they does. So this year, Ukrainian government has made unprecedented arrangements in order to get prepared properly. So first of all, we will be having the mobile hospital right next to the grave of Rabbi Nachman. We're going to be having a few centers of where the people can make the tests in order to fly safe back. We are allowing just vaccinated people and the people that have a negative COVID test and the insurance that cover the COVID as well. So starting from today, the police with the local security will be having 24 hours check on the area, so it's going to be completely safe. And important enough, we was in a direct contact with the rabbinate of Breslov Hasidus. So this year, the first time ever, pay the tourist tax to the city, which will allow to make it clean and nice and look good and be more secure and safe.
Right. Let me ask you about that, because on one hand, certainly this festival brings a certain amount of economic prosperity to that area around Uman. I'm sure that's welcome. On the other hand, as we've seen even before last year, there are times when the enthusiasm of the participants can sometimes cross certain boundaries. How does the government of Ukraine see this event?
Even though it is in the economic interest, of course, of town of Uman, mainly, we have to say that we numerous times was asking the rabbis to speak to the believers in order to behave properly. Unfortunately, last week it was a shooting incident between two Jewish guys, two Israelis in Uman, that bring to the casualty. Unfortunately, one of the Ukrainians that was in the same street was wounded. And once again, I was signing the open letter to the rabbis of Breslov in order to avoid such things. Secondly, we are trying to keep the size of the pilgrimage manageable, because of this year we are talking about approximately 30,000 people. Up to date, we are having 13 in Uman already, which is a big amount. Uman is a small town. It's about 70,000 people altogether. And so we have to obey the legislation. We have to obey the rules, of course, about the COVID prevention. And we have to make it safe and clean and enjoyable for all the visitors, and the locals don't have to be hurt.
Right. I want to move, if I can, to today's meeting, Mr. Ambassador, between your president, President Zelensky of Ukraine, who is having his first meeting as president, with U.S. President Joe Biden. I mean, Ukraine, like Israel, relatively young country in modern times. You just celebrated your 30th anniversary of modern independence. It's a country that looks to the U.S. for security aid and cooperation in the midst of a kind of difficult environment. Again, kind of like Israel. This is a period because of Afghanistan where many people are calling into question the sort of U.S. Commitments internationally. What does President Zelensky want to hear out of President Biden at that meeting at the White House?
Well, you actually says what I intended to say, that we are very similar in terms of the position of the Israel. So we intended to be strong ourselves, and we are not begging for any support. At the same time, we are looking for the stronger cooperation in the military field. A few agreements with the Ministry of Defense, between the Ministries of Defense and the Department of Defense of the U.S. has been signed yesterday. We're expecting more military and security cooperation, and that's going to be the main topic. And our president stressed this morning that they will start from the discussion about the Donbass and Crimea to be returned to Ukraine that has been temporarily occupied by Russia. And lots of the other different issues, including the economical cooperation, would be mentioned.
Right. Can I ask you about Israel? Because you mentioned, and of course, Israel and Ukraine have very close ties historically in modern times. To look at sort of the state of Israel-Ukraine relations today, which are also complicated by some geopolitical factors.
I think we are closest friends and allies ever. And that shows the intense of our cooperation and discussion. So since your new prime minister is in the office, they already spoken twice with Mr. Zelensky. And this is very nice, and we enjoy the strong cooperation economically and politically. Unfortunately, Israel last week have not joined the Crimean platform, right, which was the big issue for Ukraine. And I have to stress that this is a completely similar document that Israel has been voted for in the United Nations many times, that is talking about unity of the country and nothing else. So we assume that, but this document is open now, and I assume that Israel might join it later on. But otherwise, I think that our relations are in a great shape. We expecting your president to visit Ukraine with his official first state visit in October, right before Babi Yar. So we are getting prepared for that. And I assume that the Ukrainian leadership will be visiting Israel later on this year as well.
Okay, well, certainly hope so. I want to just move to another issue, certainly of interest to Israel, and that is the downing of Ukrainian Flight 752 in 2020 outside or in Tehran, or right soon after taking off from Tehran. Of course, you know, for Israel, that act is seen as just part of what here would be described as the callous and reckless nature of the Iranian regime. Ukraine has had issues with the way the Iranian government has handled this investigation into the circumstances. Where does that stand now?
Unfortunately, it didn't move fast the way we expected it to move. The last discussion with the Iranis happened just about a year ago, and they have not presented enough evidence to prove that this is the issue of the faults of the one person that was operating anti-missile unit. But I have to say that we are enjoying the strong cooperation with the Israeli authorities, including intelligence units.
Really?
So we are glad we have these relations and cooperation, and we are getting lots of the information because of that. And I hope it will bring us to the faster decision on this.
I just want to clarify, Ukraine is receiving intelligence information from Israel specifically relating to the downing
we are enjoying the very good relations with the Israeli intelligence that allow us to have proper information about the case.
Okay. Ukrainian Ambassador to Israel, Yevgen Korniychuk, thank you for joining us, I-24 News. And again, we join in the celebrations that just took place of 30 years of Ukrainian independence.
Thank you. Appreciate it.